Thank you to all of you for being here. I'm really excited to spend the next 45 minutes or so with all of you. So as Leanne mentioned, my name is Jennifer Carrero, and I lead communications and community partnerships for SAP Labs Canada. So I'm coming to you live this morning from Vancouver, and I'm really excited to introduce you to some of our panelists today. Before we do that, I wanted to take a quick moment to tell you a little bit about who SAP is. I often like to call it the biggest company that you've never heard of before. We do have 100,000 employees around the world. 3,000 of them are based in Canada, but we build business software. So it's business application software. It's the software that underpins a lot of the work of some of the biggest and smallest and everything in between brands. So in terms of organizations you might recognize, we have large partnerships with the NHL as an example, the NFL, the NBA, but we also run the financial transactions on iTunes as an example, and we have a huge product portfolio that spans everything from analytics to databases to finance and to travel and expense, which we'll talk a little bit about today. And so if we talk a little bit about SAP in Canada, as I mentioned, we have 3,000 employees across the country, and about 1,300 of them are based in BC. So we have a large physical office in Yaletown, which most of us haven't seen in more than a year. So we have been all working from home since March of 2020. But thinking about that 1,300 person employee workforce, the lion's share of our Vancouver-based employees, or our BC-based employees, are working in analytics. And so we have a large team, about 500, that are working on SAP Analytics Cloud, which is a business intelligence piece of software to help organizations make sense of their data. But we also have a pretty significant footprint that are working on what we call SAP Concur, which is a travel and expense tool. So if any of you have ever had to travel for business or perhaps pay for something out of pocket that then you needed to have reimbursed by your employer, we create software that helps to simplify that. And so the three panelists that I'm excited to introduce you to today are all from the SAP Concur team, or at one point were on the SAP Concur team. And really our goal for the session today is to show you the breadth of what a technology career can look like. So in Rob's presentation, he talked about this a little bit, that it's not just about computer science. Computer science is definitely important, but we're hoping to showcase here a breadth of skill sets that really help you to get a sense as to what all goes into potentially building a piece of software, or what kind of path could a career in technology take. And as a spoiler alert, I think the sky is the limit. There's absolutely no straightforward path, and I'm hopeful that our panelists today will all tell you about very different pathways that they took into technology. So without further ado, I would love to introduce, maybe first I'll introduce Apoorva Bitton. So Apoorva is a user experience designer with SAP Concur. And in your introduction, Apoorva, if you could maybe say a little bit about your path that brought you into this role at SAP, and maybe share a little bit about what a typical day might look like for you or your role.
For sure. Thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. So my name is Apoorva. I'm a user experience designer, as Jen mentioned. And my path to SAP was a little bit windy. I did not start off in the world of tech when I started college. I started at SFU in psychology and criminology. I didn't even know that user experience existed as a field. But throughout my career, I was introduced to this field by a family member who was also in tech. And that's how I discovered technology. And then from there, I transferred into a program called SIAT, School of Interactive Arts and Technology at SFU. Great program, highly recommend it. And from there, I made connections and friends, and a few of my friends interned at SAP, and then I found SAP through them, and I'm very grateful that I did. Thanks, Jen.
That's awesome. Welcome, Apoorva. Thanks for being here. Next, I will introduce Wenling Lin. So Wenling is a project manager here at SAP. Wenling, can you jump in and introduce yourself?
For sure. Thanks so much, Jen. So I'm Wen Ling, and similar to Apoorva, I kind of took a windy way and found myself at SAP. So I actually did come from a technical background. I studied electrical engineering, specializing in biomedical applications. So very different sphere, working at SAP, which is a business tech company. I've done a lot of co-op terms at Defence Canada, at BC Children's. But then I realized later on through kind of trial and error that I really enjoyed working with people and collaborating with others. And so during my one of my interviews, I realized that SAP was hiring for project managers. And so that was something that was very different. I always thought that you needed a business background to get into project management or some sort of business role. So I applied to that, and I actually learned so much from the internship. The great thing about having an internship or going through co-op is that you kind of are able to learn and kind of feel through hands-on experience what you enjoy and what you're passionate about. And so after 2 co-op terms at SAP, I eventually transitioned to full-time.
Awesome. Thanks, Wen Ling.
Thank you.
And finally, I'd love to introduce you all to Jay Wakefield. So Jay is, I believe, a software development manager at this point, but maybe has more of what you might expect from a technical worker. So Jay, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, thanks, Jen. I'm Jay, and as Jen mentioned, I'm a senior development manager at SAP. My way into tech is sort of traditional and sort of untraditional at the same time. When I graduated high school, I was actually going to go into music performance at the University of British Columbia. I was also good at math and science, so at UBC they make you apply for both your primary degree and a backup degree. So at the last second, I was like, "Ooh, I don't know if I want to actually go down the difficult road of being a full-time musician." So I started into engineering instead at UBC, and I started in engineering with the intent that I would be like a civil engineer or a mechanical engineer or something more, I guess, what you think of when you think of an engineer. But my dad has worked in technology. He actually worked for SAP for a long time as well. So I was aware of what kind of that role and what that job looked like. And then when I started doing courses at UBC that involved programming, I just realized I was really good at it. And that's kind of how I ended up in this job. As Jen said, when you think of tech, you probably think more of developers and like writing code and things like that. That is my background as well. So I started as a developer, where I'm responsible for writing computer code, writing features in software, understanding what our customers, what they're looking for in a piece of software, and making it actually do that. Now, as a manager, I manage a team of about 10 people, all working on different parts of the product. So I'm responsible for kind of overseeing what they're writing, understanding how it fits into the big picture of the product, understanding quality and what our customers expect, and then helping the team deliver that.
Awesome. So maybe I'll stick with you, Jay, as we jump into our first question. And you started to touch on it a little bit, but I imagine no 2 days ever look exactly the same. But if you could give our audience a bit of a sense as to what are some of your main activities, what might day to day, week to week, what does your job look like?
Yeah, sure. So I'll kind of touch on that from both a developer's perspective and a manager perspective, because I think maybe the developer perspective is a little more relevant. So as a developer, generally what we're doing, there's a general sense of where the company wants to go with the product. So there's a strategy that people, the people that decide these things, they decide what kind of features we need to build for the customers, what's going to drive revenue, what's going to, help our customers interact with our product better. That gets kind of disseminated down to a team like mine, and we discuss how to write code and fit it into the software and how to actually develop it. So day to day for a developer, you're usually working on one particular feature. So it might be like, we need to add a button here that gives you help information, or we might need to process your receipt, or something like that. So a typical developer is going to be trying to figure out how to build that within the context of the product. These products are very complicated. It's really like a big puzzle to try and figure out how to fit it in and make it work with everything that's already there. So you'd be working on that for, depending on the size of the feature, 3 months, maybe a month to 3 months, testing it, seeing it through all the way from just an idea to actual things that you can click on in a web browser or other things like that. My day, slightly different than that, because of course I'm kind of balancing like 5 or 10 of these at the same time. So I'm typically thinking about how to help my team understand these problems and how to help them ideate the best ways to get them into the product and test and make sure everything's on track. So for me, a typical day is just whatever the most pressing need is that day, or whoever asks me first, I'd say.
Awesome, thanks, Jay. Apoorva, I'd love to go to you next. And so certainly would love to hear a bit of your perspective around what does day-to-day, week-to-week, what does your work look like? And I think it might also be interesting if you can share a little bit about how does user experience interplay with development as an example. So what does that collaboration look like?
Awesome, great question, Jen. So my day-to-day looks kind of like, I'll start off with a week to week, then go to day-to-day. So week to week is my team works in a 2-week sprint process. So we get, let's say, 3 or 4 projects handed to us that are part of a big initiative, so a big feature. And then from there, we actually have meetings with the development team, breaking down all the requirements, any technical issues. So you're constantly working with people. So a week includes things like meetings, and then developing a plan on how to execute. And then lastly, we go into the design process phase, which includes things like conducting research. Research means looking at what products currently exist online, what the UI looks like, what is the problem statement that we're solving, and then from there going into the more what you typically think of design, which is the art portion, where you're ideating, making sketches for how the UI will look like, and then creating mocks and prototypes, and then taking that back to the team. And then together as a team, we go through the design, and if it gets approved, then we follow through. If not, then back to the drawing boards. So a day-to-day could be anywhere from just a day full of meetings, or a day full of meetings and then some heads down work of drawing on paper, and then translating those mocks into online tools such as Figma, which is a really popular one, and it's free for any students that would like to try it out, our teachers, and Sketch and other products like that. But I highly recommend Figma. Thanks, Jen.
That's awesome. And I think that the concept of a sprint, I'm not sure if any teachers are working with that kind of model in their classroom, but it's a very common agile development process that I think most of our engineering teams would also work with, in addition to the user experience teams as well. So Wenling, I'd love to go to you next. So similar question to Apoorva. I'd be curious to know, how does project management, how does that all tie in to the whole journey? And what does a typical day or week look like for you?
Awesome question. So I probably missed this in my introduction, but as a project manager, we work with different teams to help drive internal value to our various teams within the organization. So some of the examples of the initiatives that I've been part of are creating or improving new processes or implementing new tools, basically helping teams or team members in their roles to help them run better. A typical day for me looks like spending a lot of my time in meetings. And so I'm sure Apoorva, who sits very closely to me, will hear me always on the phone chatting with people on my team. But typically in these meetings, I find myself most productive, because that's kind of when the collaboration and problem solving happens. In these meetings, I check in on my team members to see how things are going. If there is any impediments or risks that are stopping us from meeting our objectives, And basically, I also ask for status updates. And also, I find myself in these executive meetings where I'm providing updates rolling up to the executive level. So outside of meetings, I actually do a lot of planning. So that requires a lot of organizational skills and coordinating with others. So as a project manager, we kind of plan from start to finish, what we would like to accomplish, what are the activities that will help us meet our objectives. And throughout the project, we monitor that if we're still on track for meeting our objectives at the end of the project.
Great. And if anyone in the audience does have questions, please feel free to share them through in the chat, and I will make sure to ask them of our panelists. So I think, a real message that I heard coming out of all of those responses is that software development or technology work is not an individual activity. As you heard with a lot of the group today, we have a lot of meetings, we're talking to each other, we're collaborating a lot of the time, and that's collaborating within your team, but you also need to liaise with different stakeholder groups across the whole project or across the portfolio or the solution. So maybe, Wenling, we can stick with you. So thinking about the contributions that you've made to SAP Concur, can you give us some background about your role and how do you build success? Why do you think this is an important component to building a piece of software?
Definitely. So for me, I actually didn't directly work with the developers. So I was actually part of a project to implement a new process. Maybe Jay has gone through the process, but it's basically to implement an architecture review process. So this is very important because we help basically during development, there's a whole life cycle. When you're writing code, it's not just you're writing code, you're testing, but also you have to make sure that you're compliant to certain requirements, such as security and making sure that your piece of code is reliable so that the overall customer experience is great. And so in this project, I worked with a lot of architects, security specialists, as well as developers to try and best understand their process and their roles to create this overall holistic process that basically, whenever you're developing code, it's a framework that you follow. And so what has really helped me become successful was actually through my hackathon experiences. In university, I participated in a lot of hackathons. And so I worked with various stakeholders. I learned how to balance various opinions as well as ideas and to help create more of a cohesive and holistic approach when problem solving. And the other thing at SAP is that there's a lot of opportunities in terms of mentorship. So I actually had a very technical mentor at the time, and I was able to bounce off some ideas, which really helped me formulate my thoughts. For me, I think this was kind of the first bigger project that I was part of, and it was also outside of my comfort zone. So being able to have a mentor was also really helpful in creating this new process.
Awesome. I'm just taking a look at time. So maybe I'll move to the next question, which I think is particularly interesting to me. So Jay, I'd love to start with you. What is the most exciting, or what is the part of your role that you enjoy or excites you the most?
Yeah, so there's two parts, I'd say. The first part, I always say this in every panel I'm ever on, is that people are amazing and super smart. And the favorite part of my job is working with all these people that are super smart, have great ideas, and working collaboratively together to come up with the best plan possible. It's like people are so smart. It's amazing. So that excites me. I'm just like working with people and understanding how their brain works and coming to the best solution possible. The other is my engineering background. I love to know how things work and why things work and how to make things better. Software development is just a big, complicated puzzle, basically, from a developer's perspective. It's like I said before, it's all about how do I write new code that doesn't break the old code, that also adds value to the product that we're building and functions properly, efficiently, and actually helps the customer. It's like the most complicated puzzle I can think of, and that is also what excites me. So it's kind of a combination of both super smart people, puzzles, and problem solving.
That's great. Apoorva, how about for you? What's your favorite part or the most exciting part of your job?
I'm going to piggyback off of Jay. I love working with the people at SAP. Everyone's incredibly smart, kind, and they're always ready to teach more and learn more from you. So I think it's the idea of growing together is what I really value and I love. And a personal favorite apart from that is when I'm designing something, I know that I'm bettering user experience, hopefully. And we do that through research. So knowing that I'm improving someone's day by even like 5% is just great. It's just a good feeling. And another thing is instant gratification, being able to make something and then see it live online is just a great feeling because then you're creating something tangible. So I think it's a 3-parter for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. The instant gratification, I think, is also something that's got to be so satisfying.
Yeah.
Wenling, what about you?
So similar to Jay and Apoorva, I love working with the people. Everyone that you encounter, whether it's on your team, people that you're working on in projects, or just people that you stumble across in the hallways, everyone is so passionate, and I love the culture here at SAP. Everyone is so friendly, always willing to share and to also teach, and also just to learn from you. One of the second part of the most exciting part of my role is, I guess, seeing a direct impact at the end of a project. So at the beginning, usually what happens is a team will come up with a couple of, I guess, pain points for our team to kind of solve and to help provide a solution for. And so one of the most extremely rewarding part is working with that exact team, collaborating, and also just seeing the direct impact at the end of, oh, like you made this process so much easier. Like now we're able to do things a lot more efficiently. So it's that gratification that you really help someone that I really enjoy as part of my role.
I love that. Okay, we've got some great questions coming into the chat. So this first one here is from Kevin, and I think, Wenling, I'd love to go to you first because I know you've had a bit of experience in some of the initiatives that we've done to maybe combat some trends in the tech industry. So Kevin's question is, from your experience, are there more males than females in the tech field? Why do you think there is this difference? And what sorts of things can we do that would spark more interest in this growing field for females?
So great question. In university, unfortunately, the stats were 10% females in my degree. So I studied electrical engineering at UBC. And so as part of early on in my university years, I've done a lot of outreach programs to also try and best understand why there is, why this field is primarily male dominant. I will say at SAP, it is pretty, it's pretty equal, or at least more equal than when I was in university, because I know that there's a lot of outreach programs similar to what I've done previously, which is to expose students at an earlier age, not just in high school, but also in the elementary years, to also experience and understand that there are other roles other than to be an engineer, but you can also be a UI UX designer. You can play various different roles within tech. So what we've done at SAP is we have a lot of these outreach programs as well as workshops, and we also invite students to come and experience a day here at SAP to tour the company, learn what we're doing, but to also help create some skills and to also encourage creativity and also an interest in tech. So we've done some coding workshops using Scratch. hour of code through DShop, and we've also done some really cool projects using this paint called conductive paint. And it teaches kids about how circuits work and how you can program to make these circuits behave a particular way. And so that's always been really cool to build interest. So I think moving forward, the best thing is to build interest in our early towns from high school and also in the primary years of school.
Yeah, and I can jump into, because this is a topic that relates a lot to some of my day-to-day work with our community partnerships. And it's interesting. I think that it is true that the industry is still predominantly, I guess it's more male dominant, but I think that things are definitely changing. So I was just privy to some statistics from SAP's hires in the first quarter of this year. And 42% of our hires were female, which is really interesting. I think broadly speaking, our percentages, our ratio is still probably about 35% female to 65% male. So certainly there's lots of interventions that we feel that we can do as an organization, as a corporation. Things like this, I think, are also really interesting in terms of order of magnitude. As teachers, you have such influence and you have such an opportunity to really be multipliers. And so the more that we can do to maybe change some myths that are commonly held about what a career in technology looks like, we're really motivated to do those types of things. Wenling brought up a lot of really great examples about some of the things that we're doing. We like to offer workshops at different grade levels for students. So we have a program specifically for grade 7 girls. A lot of the work that is coming out of our internal makerspace, which is called DShop, is focused more on elementary school students as well. So we offer a summer camp. I think it was a few days over summer last year. And if you're interested in what some of those opportunities are, Leanne I'm very happy to have you share my email if anybody wants to be in touch. Another initiative I'd encourage you to all take a look at is the STEM program at Templeton Secondary School. So for those of you who are based in the Vancouver School Board, that's a program that we've been closely partnered with for a long time. And if any of you are elementary teachers that are in Templeton's catchment, I think the STEM program is something particularly interesting to take a look at as well. Okay, so jumping into this next question is from Malcolm. So as far as secondary students that may not know what they want to do after high school and may not be ready for university, but have an interest in technology, what other resources are available for students and young people who want to engage, but they're not sure how to go about it? I'm not sure if any of you have suggestions off the top. I know, Apoorva, you had mentioned Figma. Jay, maybe I can go to you. Do you know of any resources that you might want to drive young people to maybe spark that curiosity that they have?
Yeah, so coincidentally, my wife is a grade 5 teacher in Surrey, and she's done some courses in the past, kind of the summer, to introduce herself to some age-appropriate software that kind of teaches kids about programming. I think, Wengling, you mentioned Scratch, which I believe was one of the ones, yeah, cool, which is one of the ones that she uses well. And I took a look at that as well when she got home, and I was really surprised how much programming there actually was in it, despite being a very simplified version of that. I'm not so familiar with other tools that are like that, but I do want to touch on when I was going to university and trying to decide between music and engineering. The engineering departments put on a lot of open houses that kind of showed you what, if you weren't really sure what engineering was about, they showed you what kind of projects they worked on, what research they were doing. At the time, I'm going to date myself here, but at the time, the plasma TVs weren't a thing, and UBC had a prototype of a plasma TV, trying to figure out how it worked and how to make it better. For me, those types of events were really valuable for me to understand, like, okay, yeah, this is what I could be doing. This is what it means. This is how it's going to work. And I would encourage you to encourage your students as well to kind of attend those types of sessions. The people working on those things are really, really passionate about that. And they give a lot of really great information about this is why I think tech is cool.
That's awesome. Apoorva, any suggestions from your side that might be helpful to students who want to engage, but they're not quite sure how to yet?
For sure. So there are a lot of articles available online. So one website I would recommend is medium.com especially for design with an array of a lot of different topics. It's a great resource for someone who's interested in design just to explore where to even start, because though traditional education can provide you with a lot of tools, I do think in this day and age, a lot of the resources that you need to start in tech are available online. So looking at case studies, doing trial and error of passion projects, there are a lot of guidelines on exactly what you need to do in order to create a passion project. And then there are resources available where you can partner with designers online. I can send a list out to Jen later of some resources, and then she can share that with you all, where you can get feedback from designers in the industry that can help guide your career. So those are some of the tools I would recommend for someone who's interested in design but doesn't necessarily know where to start or what program to select from. And it's just a great tool to just get your foot in through the door and build that knowledge base.
Awesome. And I've tried to sort of try and drop some things into the chat. So if any of our panelists have other suggestions, just change the, make sure you change who the chat is going to all attendees so that they can see it. Before we move off of this question though, I'd love to give Wenling a chance to jump in, especially because you have a lot of experience in running these types of events. So are there any other resources you might want to mention?
So Scratch is, I think, like one of the foundational tools that we use. It can be tailored as simple or as complex as you want. It teaches great programming principles. Essentially what it is it's simply code-based Lego blocks that you can drag and drop and snap together. And you can create anything from an animation all the way to creating Space Invaders. So we just finished our virtual camps this year. And so one of the activities that we made was we coded Space Invaders using Scratch. And it was really great to see students be really excited about that. Other resources include snap circuit sets. So if students are interested in kind of the electrical side of things, how circuits work, that's also a great resource. It's a lot of fun. I've seen kids spend hours playing with that before. For me, I was actually set on going into sciences, and throughout high school, in grade 12, I flip-flopped around. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So I attended a lot of symposiums, and as Jay mentioned, a lot of open houses as well. I think initially I was very frightened by all of these terms and specializations, and that just overwhelmed me. But going into these open houses and chatting with these students and them sharing their perspective and also why they decided to go into their respective fields really helped me make my decision. Ultimately, I was really interested by the biomedical aspects of a talk that I attended. And so literally hours before the deadline, I had switched over to engineering. So I find great value in just hearing from others and finding those open houses where as a student you can interact with people who are maybe a couple of years older than you, and to find out why they made the decisions that they did to get into their faculties.
Great. Thank you all. I think there's lots of really good nuggets in there. And the BC Tech team has also said that they would love to collect those resources, and they will share that list out with all of the attendees after the session. There's the next question that's in here. Okay, so what has, and maybe Apoorva, I'll go to you first. What has surprised you most about working in tech? Is it something that we can prepare students for as they consider their own career in the technology industry? So what surprised you?
Something that surprised me was, and this may be related to just SAP culture, is how authentic you can be and not being afraid to fail or um, being afraid to sound not smart. So, like I said, everyone from my own experience, I'm not just even at SAP, but working interning at RBC as a graphic designer prior to this. Um, Everyone is so open to teaching you, and I got this great advice from a VP of finance, right? This big man, this very scary figure, but he was just like, ask questions, ask stupid questions. Why? Because that's how you're going to learn. And especially when you are a student that are on co-ops and internships, people expect you to ask those questions because that's the only way you're going to learn and grow. So I think what surprised me was being able to be myself very, very authentically. And I think a lot of the people here can attest to the fact that the design team that I work for, it's filled with quirky, authentic individuals. And they are always just willing to help. So never be afraid to ask questions. I know it sounds cliche. Never be afraid to make mistakes. And it's safe to assume if you don't know something, high chance 5 people in the room don't know the same thing and they're just waiting for someone to speak up. I've seen my manager ask questions where I'm like, interesting. I thought everyone knew. This is a common knowledge, right? And then that's coming from my manager who obviously has much more authority or has more experience than me. So that's one thing I'm going to say is that just be yourself and ask questions. Ask stupid questions too, because again, 5 people in the room will definitely have those questions.
That's great. Wenling, how about for you? What surprised you about your career in tech?
So coming from I would say, very technical background, I actually faced a lot of imposter syndrome throughout my university years. I probably wasn't the brightest in my class, and I was very scared that in order to do well in tech, I needed to be, I guess, at the top of my class, but that was not the case. I think there's a misconception of getting into tech and how there's a high barrier of entry to get in. I would say what actually helped me get into tech was kind of the activities that I did outside of my classroom. So I volunteered a lot, and with that, that grew my soft skills, communicating with people, some of the skills that Rob mentioned, being able to problem solve, emotional intelligence, and being able to, I guess, work with different people. I also think that a lot of the soft skills, I definitely think that there's a higher importance to those. Not saying that there isn't for technical skills, there definitely is, but I think just being able to collaborate, to communicate well. I learned so much attending hackathons. And so that also exposed me to a lot of really cool trends in tech. So I was definitely surprised coming into SAP by how there were a lot of people that also came from non-technical backgrounds. And so hearing about their different stories and all the different windy paths of how they got here was very fascinating.
Great.
Can I quickly piggyback off of Wenling for one thing?
Sure, of course.
So Wenling mentioned imposter syndrome. I think that's a thing that's consistent across at all levels. So another thing is never be afraid to apply for a job that you don't think you're qualified for, because again, people are willing to teach you as long as you're curious and open to learning. So that imposter syndrome is something that you can constantly work on, but you don't need to be at the top of your class to get every job. I think you just need to be open to learning.
Mm-hmm. And Jay, what about you? What surprised you?
It's a common theme that we've been talking about today, but like, given that there's so much beyond writing code in my job, there's working with UX, there's working with product management, there's working with stakeholders. I think one thing that surprised me was that all of the other things in my life, and I really truly believe this from the bottom of my heart, help me in my job. I have an extensive music background. I have an extensive high performance sport background as well. all these things are very team focused. I was in band for a really long time. Band really requires you to be part of a team, listen, understand what's happening around you. Same with sport. It's all team based, all communication based. All of these things make me a better developer and a better manager. It's not, I think that tech sometimes gets the perception, especially developers, that developers don't like to talk. They like to sit there with their headphones on, like I've got, and and kind of work on their own and not talk and just kind of sit in the corner of their house. But that might be true for some developers, but at least at SAP, everybody that I know is very collaborative, and all of the experiences in their life really contribute to them being a performer at SAP. So I think that's what surprised me. Tech gets a interesting perception, but it's not all true.
Awesome. Well, thank you to all three of you. I think we are just close to time, so I'm going to pass it back to Leanne to wrap us up.
Perfect. Well, thank you to everyone that's here. I do have one final question for all of you, and that is, what is one thing that you wish a parent or teacher told you when you were in either elementary school or high school, as you were starting to think about your careers and your future beyond K-12? I'm going to give you each 1 minute, and I'm going to start with you, Jen.
Okay. Yeah, I think, so this has been touched on a few times, I think, by some of the panelists, but maybe just to underscore it, to think back to my experience in K-12, I would say, don't focus so much on getting the right answer. I think so much of what we've learned in actually the working world is that you often don't have the right answer, or maybe there isn't a single right answer. A lot of it is about the journey that you took to get there. How did you solve the problems? What did you learn along the way? If you failed, what did you learn from that failure? And how did you iterate on your next solution? So I know for myself, it was super important for me to get high grades and get the right answers. But that really isn't so realistic thinking about what my career actually looks like. So a lot of it more is, how do you build resilience? How do you learn from some of your failures? So that would be my advice. Do you want me to pass it along, Leanne, or do you want to?
Absolutely. Feel free to pass it along to the next.
Okay, I'll pass it to Jay.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk basically about what I was just talking about. In school, I was in music, I was in math and science, I was in sports, I was in woodshop. All these things aren't individual skills. They are complementary skills. And I wish somebody had told me that growing up, because I see it now that I've been through it, and I understand that all these things kind of make you a better person. Like math and tech makes you a better musician, and woodshop makes you a better musician and a better developer. Like all of these things work together. They're not individual classes or individual skills.
Perfect. With that, I'm going to pass it off to the next video on my screen, Wen-Ling. What are your thoughts?
Thank you. I think for me, the biggest message that I hope I had heard when I was younger was that it's okay to fail. I know it can be hard to accept failure, to experience it, but I would say that the biggest learning opportunities that I've had in university, as well as through my co-op experiences, is through failure. So long story short, I had a really bad interview, which made me question everything. And so I questioned what my passions were, what I was interested in, why I was in my role, why I was studying this, what do I do next? And I think I had a really great conversation come out of having all of those thoughts and feelings by connecting with different people from different sectors and different roles, reaching back to my mentors. And they helped me realize that everyone will go through some of the ups and downs, and there is no linear path, which I had always thought that there was a traditional path to get to the perfect role. And I think now looking back, I think it's actually through my experience of trying out all of these different things and getting that hands-on exposure where I've definitely learned the most out of, and I think ultimately has allowed me to find a career that I'm very passionate about. And honestly, this is not a role that I have ever considered I guess when I was considering what career I would love to have. I wanted to be a vet. I wanted to design video games. I wanted to be a doctor, all of these different things. And I'm really happy where I am right now.
Perfect. And last but not least, Apoorva.
Thanks, Leanne. So for me, I don't know if this is still applicable, but not boxing yourself in what your friends are doing. Because at the time when I was still figuring out what I wanted to do in high school, a lot of the fields weren't available or they weren't as widely known. So picking traditional paths like accountants, CPAs, doctors, and all of those were more common. So I think the biggest thing was recognizing what are you good at, right? And not necessarily focusing on what can I make a career out of this? Because I think sometimes we can limit our abilities by saying, can I make money off of this? So things like being creative doesn't mean that you can draw, right? Being creative can be storytelling. It can be solving mathematical problems, but in like a really elegant way. So I think it's being able to recognize what you enjoy and what comes naturally to you. And it doesn't need to translate into, I'm great at physics, I'm great at writing, right? It's what you enjoy and how do you translate those skills into a career later on. But I don't think the focus should be, how can I make money off of this when I'm an adult? Because I think that way we really limit ourselves instead of nurturing what we enjoy, what we're passionate about. Because I'm a big believer in, if you do what you love, everything will work out. So you'll find your right path, your career is going to be great, and the money will follow and all of that. So that's my biggest advice, is to not box yourself and nurture what makes you happy.